Who let the elves play football? Do they even know how to play? Okay, I'm gonna warn you now, this Dandan variant is really bad. Like, it's not fun to play at all. If you watch my original video about the other Dandans, you'll know that I have already talked about this deck. It's a mirror match of Elf Ball, where each player starts with a forest in play, and it's the only land in the deck. Well, if you want to, you can go back and watch that and get the whole rundown of it. But this video is about a different version. User IGNisbad9158 had suggested in the comment section of that video that we try Strixhaven Stadium as a replacement for the forests that each player starts with in play. And I thought that this was a brilliant idea. Strixhaven Stadium is an artifact that costs 3 and has tap, add 1 colorless mana, and put a point counter on this. Then whenever a creature deals combat damage to you, remove a point counter from it. And whenever you deal combat damage with one of your creatures to your opponent, you add a point counter. Then if you have 10 or more counters on it, you win the game. After seeing the suggestion and reading the card, I immediately got some stadiums and began tweaking this deck. I was excited too because Stadium really plays into the theme of being a sports game deck. I had to add extra rules to this mode so that the Stadium would add green mana instead of colorless, but that was no big deal since it was also a flavor win. Additionally, I removed the ability to win through life. Players do not have life totals in this mode at all and can only win with the Stadium. So now that we know how the rules have been changed from the original list, let's talk about the card changes too. Again, if you want to see the original list, check out the Other Dandan's video. And before we look at the new list, if you want to see your Dandan variant ideas featured in a future video, comment them below or join our Discord and add them into the Magic the Gathering channel. Also, please like and subscribe to the channel. It legitimately does help us out a lot. It is a free way that you can give back. Anyway, here's the current list. There are now 10 copies of each Mana Dork, and in fact, all copies of cards are either now at 10 copies or 2 copies. That way you can always know how many of each card are left in the deck and how likely someone is to draw a certain card. This goes for most other Dandan variants I make. There are definitely a couple exceptions to this rule, but it helps with consistency. The Wild Growths and Arbor Elves have been completely removed since there are no forests anymore. You now also have 10 Hunt the Hunter, so that interaction is more prevalent, and let me tell you, this is where most of the issues come in, but I'll get into that later. There used to also be some cards that could gain life, which have been removed since life totals no longer exist, and additionally there were cards that could destroy artifacts. Those have also been removed so that players can't destroy each other's only win conditions. A couple of fun additions to replace those cards are Birchlore Rangers to help you use Summoning Sick Elves, and Drove of Elves and Heedless One to make giant attackers that are hard to block or fight against. Drove of Elves has Hexproof, so it can't be targeted by removal, and Heedless One has Trample to make chump blocking impossible. As a fun nod to the point counters of the format, Polymbright Druid and Smell Fear, cards with Proliferate, have been added to the deck as well. Other than that, most of the card choices are the same, though many of the numbers have been tweaked to align with that 2 in 10 copies rule. Oh, and one cool thing about using Strixhaven Stadium in place of the Forest is it gives a player going second a little bit of a head start on points, since they can tap their Stadium on their opponent's first turn. It's a little bit of a consolation prize since going first is so strong in this format. Before playing this deck, I had some minor concerns that this deck would be a little bit too fast, since whenever a point is added to a Stadium, that point never leaves the game. For example, if I have 1 point and my opponent attacks me with 3 creatures, when those creatures hit me, my opponent essentially takes my 1 point and then gains 2 additional ones since they get a point for each creature that hit me. Now those points are permanently at play, and each time we tap our Stadiums, we add another point. I was worried that this fact was going to ramp up the points too fast, but after playing it, that was the least of my problems. So anyway, what does this format play like? Are you excited for a more thematic elf football experience? Well, rather than me just explaining all these interactions again like I did with the other Dandan video, why don't we just watch a game of it for ourselves? So, I go first and open with the Llanowar Elves, putting a point counter on my Stadium and pass. My brother also plays a Fyndhorn Elves the same way and passes back. Then on my turn, I proceed to play another Llanowar Elves, and then I cast Hunt the Hunter, targeting his elf and ostensibly stone raining him, putting him behind a turn. He repeats his previous turn with the Llanowar Elves and passes again. I then cast another Hunt the Hunter, setting him back to square one yet again, and then I play a Leaf Crown Visionary to pump my team. As he has done every turn this game, he plays a Mana Dork and passes without being able to make any other plays, and again, on my turn, I use a fight spell to kill his Mana Dork. This time it's Smell Fear, which puts a point counter on my Stadium, putting it up to 5. Then I attack him and put me up to 6 points and him down to 2. I bet you can guess what his next turn looked like. And you won't believe what I do on my next turn. Well, actually, I just tap my stadium to go to 7 points and then swing with 4 attackers into his 1 blocker for game. Did that look very fun to you? Did it look like we were having a good time? We played multiple matches of this, and every time the player going first won just like that. So what's my conclusion? It sucks so bad, dude. This deck does not work at all. It is not fun. Unless you make some drastic changes to it, it is completely unplayable. The player who goes first has a massive advantage, especially if they have any fight spells to kill their opponent's mana. If you don't change the base rules, then you have to at least put forests in the deck. Otherwise, the fight spells will act as stone raids that completely snowball the game instantly. If you do put in forests, I recommend around 15 to 20 of them. You don't need as many lands in this deck as you would for other Dandan variants, since you start with the stadium in play, and also there's a ton of mana dorks in the deck. And that's going to be my next step. So who knows, you might see a Elf Football 3.0 video in the future if it works out. But I will only make that video if adding the lands to the deck and adjusting the fight spells actually makes it good. As for y'all, if you have any good ideas of how to make this deck actually work, please let me know in the comments. Peace!